Hello, and thank you for bearing with Parth's film. No, I'm joking. Um, so, I mean, so I'll just start with you. Uh, Pokhar Ke Dunu Paar, right? But the English title is uh,
On either side.
On Either Side of the. Why not on both sides?
I think it was just a semantic decision. So I wanted to go with on both sides, but I think either just phonetically just sounded better. So it's like, yeah.
So there's no special. And then just opening, and either one of you could answer. Because outside we were talking about limitations of making the films that the kind of films all of you make. There are multiple people here sitting who, like for example, Abhinav, even you, who are involved with different directors, but in the same milieu, like Achal, everybody. So you guys saw Dhui. So of course there is a stylistic choice that you've kept the camera static quite often. And there's an aspect ratio that you're following, which is 4:3, which I assume you decided earlier. But talk a little. Could you talk a little more about how that limitation exists and how does that then start playing into the grammar of your film and how you use it, rather than making it an impediment or a limitation? Yeah.
So I think as soon as you start making like independent films that are made on such a small budget, naturally there are limitations that come in. We were limited by the sort of camera that we are using and the amount of lights that we can have and how good your tripod is, how good it can handle tilting, panning, and how much can we move the camera. And because these limitations naturally exist, it's always better to take that into consideration and then design your film accordingly. Because at the end, you don't want to you don't want it to be seen as a limitation. So say if Pokhar Ke Dunu Paar was some other film and we had to say I'd written it set in a part like a CPI office that is like stories tall or whatever, and then we are not getting that location and we have to figure that location out by ourselves or create it on a set or something. It requires an immense amount of budget. So naturally you write according to the spaces that you feel that you will have access to. You write believing that like these limitations already exist, and how much what can we do with that. Matlab, you don't want to go into so much of looking at it as a limitation, but rather as just those become your formal choices, like how much you can move the camera, how much static frames do you need to have. All of those become choices that are guided by your limitation, but then after that you're just free to do whatever you want within those limitations. So that becomes your form. It's not as if I like given a choice, if I had like an unlimited budget for the film, I would probably not have the exact same form, to make the film. But I think the film gets made in the process of making it. So I think it's always better to think not of those things as limitations, but as as your formal choices that you're going to take anyway. Matlab, so then as soon as you stop thinking of them as limitations, they kind of free you. Matlab, as long as you keep thinking about कि यार कैमरा यहाँ पे मूव करना था बट नहीं कर सकते हैं, तो इट बिकम्स एन इम्पेडिमेंट. इफ यू स्टार्ट थिंकिंग कि नहीं कैमरा तो मूव नहीं कर सकते हैं बट देखते हैं कितना फ्रेम में क्या मिल सकता है हमको स्टैटिक फ्रेम रखते हुए, तो नेचुरली दैट बिकम्स योर फॉर्म. तो
And so, Pradeep, what does that do to the choreography of your scene? Because clearly you're very good actors, right? But then, as he's saying, that builds into your form, right? So, but it's static. So then, how do you choreograph? Because there's a lot of foregrounding and backgrounding where Abhinav and Tanaya are sitting, which is like we see them here, then we see them there. There's a sense of depth, then there's sense of movement. So what is that process then?
What happens with limitations is like usually वही होता है, like when you're trying to frame, there are like you're constantly thinking about you have like unlimited choices. हम तो कहानी तो कहीं भी बता सकते हैं. So once you have limitations, most of the choices are made kind of like it's become easier, like you're restricted to these kind of things, and then from there you start working out. जैसा इधर था लाइक व्हेन वी वर गोइंग ऑन फ्लोर व्हाट वी न्यू वेयर लाइक हमको ये स्पेस पता था कि वी आर गोना शूट इन एक रूम के अंदर करना है हमको एंड लाइक 4:3 वाज लाइक was already decided, our aspect ratio was decided. From then on, it was more, हम लोग pre-prod में, because script तो was very, क्या बोलते हैं, like, हाँ, fluid था, because like, we knew what was going to happen in the scene, but we didn't have the details of it. So it was not possible for us to pre-plan to the extent of like, beat to beat यही करने वाला इतना, ये तो fix तो नहीं था हम लोग. So that was more freeing for us, so we couldn't plan for it. That was already there, we knew this. So जितना हम लोग प्लान कर सकते हैं is like how to break up that space. We knew एक घर पे करने वाला है, so we knew to make that space more dynamic हमको करना है because that was fixed for us. And we knew 4:3 ratio है. So how best can we use it to say the story? So the thought process starts with the limitations rather than thinking it as a limitation. हम तो शुरू ही वैसा ही किया था 4:3 करना है, तो इसमें how do you use this image into it? And since we are shooting it inside a room, so we had to make the room also more dynamic. So वो choices तो were made based on that. हमको पता था कि मतलब एक ही इसमें room तो नहीं दिखाना हमको. We wanted to keep it a little fragmented also. Right. So that those choices were made because we knew we are not going to be able to move the camera. We are not going to be. Well, yeah, we didn't think of it like that. हमको तो ये already था कि यही करना है तो ऐसा कर लेते. Let's use the 4:3 to tell the space more, or like static cameras to have. तो ये break down कर लेते हैं room because we're going to have static. So that gives us कि we can have a more narrower vision. So let's have like foregrounding, and so let's make it feel part of like a broken down house rather than one single piece of house. So from the limitations we go on deciding choices, make choices based on the limitations.
See, as you were saying, it is fluid, but a lot of times there's a confusion that how much do you write? What do you actually write, and what is writing? Because additional dialogues are by Abhinav. So, either of you, could you just talk a little bit about, because we understand what that fluidity would be, but could you talk a little bit more about, do you write a whole scene, then you go and dismantle it? Do you write some parts of it? Do you write the parenthesis and then you go there and you improvise? Or you have beats in the scene, a beginning, middle, end, and then it's filled in, the coloring is filled in. Either of you, if you could talk about the process of that co-writing process in the film.
So largely the script was around 40 pages, the screenplay of Pokhar. And all the scenes that are there in the film, all those scenes were already in it. So they weren't like, we weren't adding scenes on the floor. But within the scene, sometimes only the purpose of the scene was written down. Like, this is what the point of this scene is. Sometimes in some scenes, there's like a lot of things that have been written down. The dialogues and everything is there, like all the beats are there. But even within those scenes, like even if like everything has been written down, we are figuring that those beats also out while on set. Like, we are not just sticking to we have to move from here to here. Like, if a more natural progression occurs while shooting it, while Tanaya and Abhinav are improvising that scene, so we will go for that. But as long as the point of the scene doesn't change. So the point of the scene has always supposed to be like, so the thematic has to be kept in mind while we are improvising, say, or anything of the sort. So so what was changing at a lot of places was basically what is going to happen within the scene. So sometimes, like for instance, there are like two scenes that are almost completely improvised. Drinking scene, mein still there are things that have been written, but there are like, I think, two scenes in the film, or दो scene ही है ना. I think there's the scene in which Abhinav goes to tell Dheeraj that तेरा bike बेचना है. That scene was not written at all. It was just a small thing that he goes to tell him. I was initially thinking of it just as a montage. But then during the pre-production, Dheeraj and Abhinav were improvising, and something came out in that scene that was very exciting. Like that thing about कि मेरा पहला bike था. And I was just sitting there looking at it, that improvisation, and I was like, हाँ यार, वो अपना पहला bike होने का जो sense है, like which I also remember कि मेरा जो first bike था Apache था, and like that is the bike that is there in the film actually. So that is the bike that gets sold. So वो naturally एक personal connection भी था उस object के साथ भी, but naturally कि वो emotion like really latched on to me, मतलब जबकि वो ऐसे improvisation में आया. And then we decided कि हम लोग अच्छा ये करेंगे, let's keep this. and we don't know exactly what. At no point was that scene written down, but while shooting also Dheeraj and Abhinav are improvising and they're figuring out how to construct that scene while on floor. It's already raining, it's already all of that is already happening while we are shooting, because that scene has been written in the rain, so the rain is there और उसमें ही फिर वो लोग improvise कर रहे हैं, and that's how we figured that scene out. Then another scene that is completely improvised was again Abhinav and Dheeraj's later scene at the terrace, जहाँ पे वे finally they come to a heart to heart about Dheeraj tells Abhinav about कि सही लड़की है शायद, और Abhinav also talks about कि उसके life में क्या problems है. So that portion is also completely improvised. So there were like these two scenes that were completely improvised, but other than that there were scenes जिसमें थोड़ा सा लिखा हुआ है, मतलब at least there is a little bit that has been written down, and उसके ऊपर से Abhinav and Tanaya are improvising and they are bringing, because I think the relationship part was very sorted. In terms of not sorted because we were constantly figuring things out, but at least in terms of the dynamic, how the relationship is going to be scene to scene was sorted. The friends thing was a little more fluid, and what exactly the scenes with the friends is going to do, वो थोड़ा सा और मतलब we are still exploring that. तो उसमें था. So, and dialogue wise, so I think it's all the cast have written their own dialogues in the film. Like screenplay wise, Abhinav was part of like constructing these scenes, but dialogue though it's all cast members are given their like own dialogues.
बट आई थिंक पार्थ वॉज वेरी स्पेसिफिक इन दैट वे कि उसको किस सीन में क्या आर्क रखना है या पूरे आर्क के हिसाब से कौन सा सीन फिट हो रहा है. बट वो ड्रिंकिंग सीन में भी जो नेक्स्ट सीन है उसका, जो मैं और धीरज बात कर रहे हैं, उसका एसेंस एक ड्रिंकिंग सीन में ही पहले लिखा हुआ था, जिसमें सुमित बर्स्ट आउट होता है. पहले सुमित बेसिकली ड्रिंकिंग सीन में ही बर्स्ट आउट होता था और सब कुछ बोल देता था और उसका निकलता था. देन हमें लगा कि ये इन्फॉर्मेशन इस सीन के लिए ज़्यादा हो जाएगा, तो हम लोग इसको 2 सीन में ब्रेक कर देते हैं. फिर उसके बाद सीन वो पूरा फिर से इम्प्रोवाइज हुआ. बट मोस्टली जो सीन्स थे उसके पार्थ के पास पूरे बीट्स थे, डायलॉग्स भी बेसिक लिखे हुए थे, और उसको आइडिया था कि ये सीन कहाँ से कहाँ जाएगा. तो उसके हिसाब से उस सीन का बीट्स और इन्फॉर्मेशन हमारे पास था, उसके साथ हम लोग फिर आगे बढ़ते थे कि इस सीन में कहाँ तक पहुँचा सकते हैं सीन को बेसिकली.
And something interesting that you do, which you do, Achal does, which all of you guys do, which is quite interesting as a process, is that you keep reshooting scenes, right? You go back, you see it, you reshoot, because in traditional formats, we shoot a scene, max to max, maybe we'll shoot patchwork, right? But you shoot whole scenes again and again. Which were those scenes, and maybe just shed some light on that process of deciding to do that scene again, and also what does that mean for, say, you in terms of, does that become a correctional mechanism? Do you go somewhere from there, or do you go in different directions? How does that figure for you guys as performers? And just some amount of shedding that light on why do you do it. Anybody who wants to go first. Yeah.
Okay, so I think it works for me, shooting the scene again and again. As an actor, I delve deep into the character. More and more time, you make me repeat the lines and make me do the scenes. And each time I'm doing the scene, there's something new that is coming. So it's a lot of fun. So for me and Abhinav, each time we were doing the same scene, हर बार कुछ नया निकलता था, हर बार कुछ नई चीज़ आ रही है. So I feel it was a lot of fun for me as an actor. I learned a lot doing her scene.
Give an example, which scene?
So I think the first fight that we have, we shot that scene so many times, and also a drinking scene together. We shot it so many times. I think 12-13 टेक्स तो हुए ही होंगे उसके.
वो ड्रिंकिंग वाले
का तो था ही. पहले फाइट का भी काफी बार हम लोग ने किया था. और इनिशियली व्हेन वी डूइंग, स्पेशली द फर्स्ट फाइट व्हेन वी वर डूइंग इट, आई रिमेंबर दैट वी वर इंटरप्रेटिंग द सीन वेरी डिफरेंटली, मी एंड Abhinav, both of us. And our anger was more outwards. We were shouting more. We were more like directly being angry at each other. And as we went on with the scene, as we kept shooting and shooting, we calmed down. And the anger kind of seeped in. It kind of settled within us and was no longer outwards. It was more internalized. So it was very interesting for me. So kind of being, because as Priyanka, I'm living as I'm shooting, right? The character is living as I'm shooting. I don't get to be Priyanka more than that. So for me, I guess जितनी बार हम बार वो करते थे ना, हम ज़्यादा कैरेक्टर को समझ पाते थे, ज़्यादा ठहराव आ पाता था, ज़्यादा उस इमोशन के साथ, जो भी इमोशंस है, कॉम्प्लेक्सिटी ऑफ डिफरेंट इमोशंस, आई कैन सिट विद दैट And yeah, it's very interesting for me as an actor. That the process, whatever you do, like keep shooting the scene, it's just, yeah, it works for me. Yeah.
पैसे तो होते नहीं, हमारे पास समय बहुत
है
है.
ना?
बहुत
I know.
हाँ, वो तो बेसिकली द फर्स्ट फाइट सीन वो हम लोगों ने बहुत अर्ली कर लिया था शूट.
फर्स्ट डे ऑफ
फर्स्ट डे ऑफ शूट हम लोगों ने वो फाइट सीन सबसे पहले शूट किया था. तब तक हम लोगों का डायनेमिक भी वैसा नहीं था और वो बिल्ड ही हो रहा था. बट एक और उस सीन का जब तब ब्लॉकिंग और फ्लो बहुत अलग था जो अभी हम लोगों ने देखा. तो जैसे ही ब्लॉकिंग और फ्लो के हिसाब से पार्थ ने दोबारा वो रीराइट किया कि ये सीन सिर्फ बहुत सारा इन्फॉर्मेशन इतने में नहीं आ गया और तब तक बहुत सारा शूट हो चुका था. तो हमें लगा था जो जो चीज़ें इसके पहले हुई है इससे ज़्यादा इस सीन में भी थोड़ा बहुत इन्फॉर्मेशन आगे पीछे हो सकता है. तो जैसे ब्लॉकिंग सीन का चेंज हुआ ना वैसे हम दोनों का डायनामिक उस सीन को लेकर चेंज हो गया. लाइक पहले बेसिकली मैं और तन्या एक बेड पे बात कर रहे हैं और मैं उसको अप्रोच नहीं कर पा रहा हूँ. ऐसा ब्लॉक थे हम लोग. जैसे ही पार्थ ने उस सीन का ब्लॉकिंग चेंज किया वैसे ही वो पूरा सीन बदल गया और उस पॉइंट तक पहुंच गया जहाँ पे मैं रोना स्टार्ट करता हूँ. और वो रोना था नहीं तो फिर उस पॉइंट में मेरे को रोना है तो फिर उसको फिर आगे बढ़ा दिया हम लोगों ने. तो इंटरेस्टिंगली दोबारा रीशूट करना फिर बट वो एक ही सेम तरीके से आप नहीं कर सकते फिर दोबारा रीशूट. आपको कुछ इन्फॉर्मेशन स्क्रिप्ट वाइज ब्लॉकिंग कुछ तो चेंज करना हो ताकि उसकी वापस से जो स्पॉन्टेनिटी आ पाए उस सीन की या फिर जो इमोशंस वापस से इवोक कर पाओ आपस में वैसे कुछ.
I think वही like if you're completely जैसे वो जो the scene in which both of them are drunk and they're sitting on the bed together. वो तो ऐसा नहीं था कि वो तो मतलब एक स्ट्रेच में ही हमने भी shot like a lot of takes of it. पर जैसा जो फर्स्ट फाइट वाला सीन है इनका जो फर्स्ट आर्ग्यूमेंट है उसका when we initially shot तो there is a bit of a gap between them already. And तो they are restricted in where they are sitting kind of और वो वाला चीज था and it kind of like उनका झगड़ा escalate होता है and he just leaves and that's where the scene was ending. बट वो हमने शूट किया एंड उसमें मज़ा नहीं आ रहा था मतलब ना कि देयर वाज समथिंग मिसिंग इन इट. तो उसको रीराइट किया कीपिंग इन माइंड कि वो एक झगड़ा होता है. सुमित जाता है बाहर देन ही कम्स बैक एंड देन देयर इज अनदर कॉन्वर्सेशन दैट हैपेंस. तो यहाँ तक था एंड देन फाइनली एक सुमित ब्रेकिंग पॉइंट पे पहुंचता है जिसके कारण वो फिर बाद में जाके बाइक बेचेगा. ठीक है वैसा था. बट देन व्हेन वी आर शूटिंग तो ये वाला पार्ट भी हुआ. उसके बाद फिर अभिनव को उस टाइम पे परफॉर्म करते करते ही स्टार्टेड क्राइंग एंड देन वी डिसाइडेड कि दिस इज एन इंटरेस्टिंग थिंग आई डोंट वांट टू लूज इट. तो लेट्स इनकॉर्पोरेट इट फर्दर इनटू बिकॉज इफ द कैरेक्टर इज एट अ वेरी ब्रोकन सॉर्ट ऑफ प्लेस वहाँ पे मुझे ऐसा लग रहा था कि इफ ही गोज इनटू अ वेरी सेल्फ पिटी प्लेस मुझे नहीं लग रहा था कि उसके बाद का जो नेचुरल प्रोग्रेशन है ऑफ कि वो जाके अपने दोस्त की बाइक बेच देता है वो नेचुरल नहीं लग रहा था. तो फिर अब once this character has gone into that sort of self pity sort of mode then we need to again वो re-energize that feeling कि you need to do something for the household. तो फिर वो वाला पार्ट जो था वो हमने तो उसी टाइम पे डिसाइड किया कि then तनया मतलब प्रियंका will go outside and she'll speak to Sumit and she'll tell him कि at the end तो it's just the two of us ना मतलब कब तक ये
Was it not
चलता
written in
रहेगा.
the script before? Like
वो-
how
वो वाला part.
वो जो बोल रही है इससे कि अब सिर्फ हम ही दोनों तो हैं, दोस्त तो सब छोड़ ही देते हैं. ये तो था. I think it was
वो
part
था?
of the structure of the
नहीं
script. I
I don't-
remember, no?
वो नहीं था आई डोंट थिंक. वो एंड वाला पार्ट नहीं था उसमें ना उससे पहले तक वो बाद में लिखा था बट द फाइनल पार्ट ऑफ इट वाज एडेड मच लेटर लाइक एकदम एट द एंड. तो इट्स जस्ट कि वो फ्लूइडिटी से आई थिंक यू आर एबल टू बट वही चीज़ अगेन जस्ट रिमेम्बरिंग कि इसके बाद हम लोग कहाँ जा रहे हैं. And if something happens in this scene that disturbs that flow, so you have to again rewrite in the moment to figure out कि वो right flow पे भी जाना है मुझे. कि there is a certain emotion that will lead Sumit to sell his friend's bike. तो वहाँ तक तो हमको पहुँचना ही है. तो we can't end this scene at some other moment. तो at the end वो moment तो आना पड़ेगा. तो how do we get to that? Is that moment coming through anger? Or is that moment coming through a realization कि हाँ यार मतलब हम लोग ही हैं मतलब ना कि हम लोग at the end we have to look out for each other. So या तो इस इमोशन से आ रहा है या फिर आउट ऑफ गुस्से में वो अपने दोस्त की बाइक बेच रहा है कि नहीं हो पा रहा है मेरे से घर का खर्चा नहीं चल रहा है. तो कौन से इमोशन से हम लोग जा रहे हैं वो इमोशन चेंज हो सकता है बट एट द एंड जाना तो वहाँ पे है. तो फिर वो कैसे हम लोग नेविगेट करें उस चीज़ को एंड दिस फेल्ट मोर इंटरेस्टिंग देन व्हाट वाज रिटन अर्लियर. तो हम लोग वी जस्ट वेंट इन दैट डायरेक्शन. तो आई थिंक वो अगर इफ यू कीप शूटिंग दो सीन्स अगेन एंड अगेन तो वो स्कोप मिलता है ऑफ लुकिंग एट फर्दर कॉम्प्लेक्सिटी विद इन दैट सीन जो एग्जिस्ट करती है. तो या दैट्स लार्जली हाउ वी वर्क.
और पानी का बड़ा पानी हर किस्म से पानी जो ज़मीन पर है the water that is going to fall the water that falls on water there's a lot of that in this film right. We in Bombay relate to monsoons in a certain way but again we relate to monsoons in Darbhanga, Bihar, especially the cow belt, in a very different way. मतलब कीचड़ कादो होगा, मेंढक निकलेंगे, और भी तरीके सबका. So especially for you, while sort of looking at the overall oral score of the piece, how did you relate to that? Because I assume you did not grow up in Darbhanga. Yeah. So that information that you were getting, and to look at the film and to look at Monsoon and how you relate to it, and how he wanted you to relate to it, what was that process like? And then coming to the score of the film.
I mean, I can like reverse engineer it now, but I don't think water itself was a discussion. The entirety of the feeling of the film itself made me cut down the highs of all the tracks. So, I mean, all of them do sound like they're in my mind. But again, reverse engineering, they sound a little underwatery, if you'd say. I'd cut down all the highs from most of the tracks. Like the only track where I've not cut the highs is the one where she's dreaming. When she's on the jhula, yes. So there is that muffled nature to all of them, which was also, I guess, just a tonality choice more than it to reflect the monsoon of this, the whole thing. Yeah, but I mean, now that you say it, great to realize things on stage.
And also you open the film with पानी की आवाज से आप open करते हैं, और उसके बहुत सारे textures आप use करते हैं through the film. Like so, and if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, you timed certain scenes according to बारिश होगी या overcast होगा या धूप होगी. What was that decision like, and why some scenes were supposed to happen only when you can see the rain fall, right? Or why were certain scenes supposed to happen on, say, an overcast day? And what were those decisions like from both of you? I mean, like, and अब बारिश होगी, डिपार्टमेंट ने बोल तो दिया पर फोरकास्ट रह गया, तो हाउ डू यू डील विद दैट एज अ सिनेमेटोग्राफर कि आप घर में सीन शूट करेंगे? वही कर सकते हैं ना, मतलब बाहर तो शूट कर नहीं सकते, तो इंटीरियर शूट करेंगे. सो हाउ डू यू डील विद दैट? सो टू क्वेश्चंस.
So I think largely बस there was this phase in between जो मैंने screenplay मतलब brain तो पूरा ही film में तभी हो रहा है when it's there in the screenplay. तो वो लिखा हुआ था, and there was just that feeling of वो बीच में that passage that is there between the first argument that they have and then the second day that begins, मतलब जो the long day that begins, उसके बीच में there is this phase of rain that comes. तो screenplay में ही ऐसा था, just it felt right with the mood उस टाइम पे, मतलब so there was no like as such particular reason कि यहीं पे बारिश क्यों हो रही है, but वो एक sort of एक intermezzo sort of एक बीच में rain का आके, and then almost the film is completely divided into 2 different days punctuated by a period of rain in between. So वैसा ही था मतलब structurally. And
one of the most evocative scenes in the film is when Abhinav, for me personally, and is when Abhinav stands with the umbrella and we're seeing him from behind and the bike is going, right? Like it'd be a disservice to the scene to like then put it into words. I mean, it evokes multiple things, and that's the beauty of it. So I mean, like 100 marks for that. Yeah. Yeah, directly. So how would you deal with कि अच्छा अभी तो बाहर शूट नहीं कर सकते हैं, अभी जल्दी अंदर चलो, चीटिंग करो, लाइट काटो, लोगों को पता ना लगे कि आज बारिश नहीं हुई.
That was always there in the script. There was this portion that read like rain montage. When we were reading the script, when I was reading the script, that we know, matlab, there were like 4 shots or 5 shots he had written in the script. So I was like always prepared that there is going to be a rain montage. So you build a mood for the film. Because the rain is going to come, it's not like a huge jump of time is not there. So you're always building to keep that entire mood. So there's going to be an overcast mood, there are going to be like slide winds here and there. So ये mood तो already था. So when we started shooting, that was like proper sunny. So because we are doing an overcast thing, we decided we were also stuck with like the thing had like all doors were there and all windows were there. So वो problem था because every time we shot through that we could see the sun outside and it was pretty hot. So then but that's the thing, right? Like you know the mood that you want. then it's all about like reaching there. There's no like fixed way to reach there. तो हमने decide कर लिया कि मतलब when it was too sunny we would close the windows. It didn't matter to us whether it made sense, because for the mood to maintain, and it added to its quality. We didn't think whether it made sense. For it was not. It was important not to
Whether
break
it
the mood.
made continuity sense or not, it
It
wasn't.
did- it was
wasn't.
not the
Yeah.
thought that was
Yeah, you're not
driving
really
it.
following light continuity, and doesn't even bother any bit. I mean,
That was
didn't
not
bother
that
me.
was not deciding the choice. More, it was about the mood and the atmosphere that needed to be maintained. क्योंकि वो build करना था हमको कि like an overcast say that rain montage that comes in between was like a punctuation. So everything is on a hold type. Everything stops at that point. The narrative that's going on kind of like takes a break at that point. So हमको ये पता था कि we need to build it up and then go from beyond that. So that was like deciding a choice. And the rain तो वही है, भरोसे पे बैठा था because I don't know the weather. तो वो बोल रहा था कि बारिश होगा. So you are always
No,
like.
I was also hoping rather than being confident कि बारिश होगी.
वही है. तो we are just hoping कि rain होता है तो भागो जो
So
shoot करना करो.
while scheduling we had like ऐसा 3 हमारे रोज मतलब एक पॉइंट के बाद हमने बंद ही कर दिया था schedule करना. But usually on the day before we are going to shoot, हमारे 3 categories बने हुए होते थे वहाँ पे बोर्ड पे कि अगर sunny है तो ये shot लेना है, अगर overcast है तो ये लेना है, और if it's raining तो हमको ये shot लेना है. तो it's just like written down और एक पॉइंट के बाद we realize कि इसका भी कोई point नहीं है, तो जो होगा वो कर लेंगे shoot type का मतलब.
कभी-कभी तीनों 1 घंटे के अंदर हो जाता था.
रेन मशीन नहीं ला पाते थे.
रेन मशीन थी.
Oh, independent cinema.
नहीं रेन मशीन है हमारे पास. नहीं वहाँ पे एक अचल ने गामा घर के टाइम पे ही क्रिएटेड रेन
अच्छा,
मशीन
oh.
व्हिच इज लाइक पाइप्स में शावर हेड्स लगा के बेसिकली एक पूरा सेटअप क्रिएट किया हुआ है व्हिच यू कैन कनेक्ट विद अ मोटर एंड देन इट स्टार्ट्स रेनिंग. तो हमारा एक अपना पर्सनल रेन मशीन था ऑलरेडी हमारे पास. सो देयर आर लाइक 2-3 शॉट्स जिसमें द रेन मशीन हैज बीन यूज्ड. तो
क्या बात है, क्या
ये
बात है.
सब
दरभंगा की.
इसी सबसे बजट फिर थोड़ा बढ़ जाता है फिल्म का.
But you have a very interesting auditioning process, which I think you should tell people, is that you don't use lines that you have in the script written, but you rather ask people to sort of improvise. So the gentleman who bursts a lighter and अपनी आँख फोड़ लेते हैं वो भी वहाँ बैठे हुए हैं. तो उनके लिए भी तालियां बजनी चाहिए. वो बेचारे वहाँ बैठे हुए हैं, वो वहाँ हैं. तो आप भी बताइएगा इस बारे में, क्योंकि आप भी उस प्रोसेस से गुजरे थे. तो ये जो ऑडिशन करने का प्रोसेस है, जिससे मैं बड़ा इत्तेफाक रखता हूँ कि ये क्यों करते हैं आप, तो लाइनें क्यों नहीं बुलवाते हैं एक्टरों से? हाँ, तो क्यों बोलते हैं आप मेहनत करो?
आई थिंक लाइंस बोलना फिर वो एक डिफिकल्ट होता है इन द सेंस कि यू डोंट गेट एन ओवरऑल सेंस ऑफ हाउ दे आर सीइंग द कैरेक्टर और व्हाट सॉर्ट ऑफ परफॉर्मेंस इमेजिन कर रहा है द एक्टर फॉर दिस कैरेक्टर. फिर वो ऐसा हो जाता है कि a lot of people can prepare lines and say them, but एक overall vibe of understanding the vibe of that person while playing this character is I think more important than seeing if they are like good with reading these lines. And because our form of the film was also such, क्योंकि हम लोग improvise करने वाले थे, ये already पता था, तो it's better you also check कि how is this person while improvising. So it was, अगर कोई एक्टर ऐसा हो जाता मिल जाता हमको जो who's struggling with improvisation, तो हमारे लिए भी difficulty होती, because then if somebody is speaking written lines and somebody else is speaking very naturally, तो वो एक अजीब सा contrasting style हो जाएगा जो कि will work against the film. तो इसलिए we wanted to also check कि how they are with improvising. तो उसके कारण भी वो हो रहा था. And I think all the male actors के auditions हुए थे on the drinking scene only. तो उनको एक बार वो पढ़ने के लिए देता था एंड देन आई वाज लाइक कि कुछ भी बात करो मतलब ना कि एंड आई वुड आल्सो गिव देम लाइक ऑल द 4 कैरेक्टर्स कि अच्छा ये वाला एक बार ट्राई करके देखो, ये वाला ट्राई करके देखो, ये वाला ट्राई करके देखो. तो 4 एक्टर्स को एक साथ बुलाते थे हम लोग ऑडिशन के लिए और चारों को बिठाते थे और चारों को एक एक करके चारों कैरेक्टर्स देते थे. एंड देन वी वुड सी कि कौन सा एक्टर कौन से कैरेक्टर में फिट हो रहा है एंड वैसे करके वी वर वर्किंग अराउंड दैट.
तो आपके लिए कैसा था? आप तो बाकी ऑडिशंस भी देते होंगे जहाँ लाइनें आपको मिलती हैं, स्क्रिप्ट होती है, वर्सेस दिस. तो क्या बताइए थोड़ा क्या?
तो लाइन जैसा तो कभी भी ऐसा कुछ नहीं था कि एग्जैक्ट ये लाइन होगा और हमको यही बोलना है. हर सीन से पहले बात करने जैसा था कि बार बार बात करना. कि मेरे को एग्जैक्ट याद है कि जो सीन है जहाँ पे हम दोनों को ऊपर बैठ के बात करना है कि एक पूरे बर्स्ट आउट के बाद और वो कंटिन्यूस उस पूरी लड़ाई के बाद वो बस बैठ के बात करेंगे. और मुझे याद है कि मैंने जस्ट मजाक में इनको मतलब शुरू में बोला था कि यार भैया जब मैं पट्टी लगा रहा हूँ तो मुझे सच में नहीं दिख रहा है इधर का ना, लाइक कि मुझे ये वाला पार्ट नहीं दिखता है जब मैं लगा रहा होता हूँ तो. एंड
बस इतना बोला है एंड सीन से जस्ट पहले ही मुझे आके बोलते हैं कि अच्छा ठीक है कि कुछ कुछ ऐसा ट्राई करते हैं कि कॉन्वर्सेशन इसी बात से स्टार्ट करते हैं कि बहुत देर का साइलेंस है एंड देन तुम बस बात करने के लिए बता रहे हो सुमित को कि यार सच में नहीं दिखता मेरे को ना ये जब मैं लगाता हूँ तो बट वहाँ से थोड़ा थोड़ा जानना शुरू करना बस कि क्या हुआ था नीचे या फिर किसी ने कुछ बोला तुमसे तो मुझे याद है कि एग्जैक्ट 5 मिनट के अंदर अंदर कुछ वैसा था वो कि बात करेंगे बस इस बारे में बात करेंगे जैसा ही हमेशा था कि ऑडिशन के टाइम पे भी कि बस बात करना है इस बारे में और फिर या फिर वो जैसे पहले बाइक वाला भी जो कॉन्वर्जेशन है कि जब बाइक सेल आउट हो रहा है तो कभी भी लाइंस नहीं थी बस थोड़ी देर पहले सीन को समझा एंड बात करना शुरू करो और फिर उसके बाद आगे लेके जाके देखने वाला चीज़ था हमेशा से
Did you also audition in the same manner?
No, you gave a script to me. Like that scene, जो मच्छर वाला scene है कि बहुत मच्छर हो गया दरभंगा में, जो प्रियंका 2 से वो बात करी है, दोस्त वाला scene. That was my audition scene, my first audition scene. After that, me and Abhinav, we had like a online Zoom call on which we try to improvise on different scenes and we try to build a background together of like how a relationship was when we were in Delhi together, and because it's not shown in the film, right? So we're trying to build. That's all. We were improvising, yeah, and that's how you decided, I guess.
Because
yeah.
her audition came online, so online में it's very difficult to do that. So after the initial audition came and we liked that, तो उसके बाद से next reading that we did with Abhinav and Tanaya, उसमें it was open कि it's just a scene that is happening और उसमें let's see where you can go मतलब and बहुत interesting था वो वाला भी मतलब.
Okay, so thank you everybody for coming and thank you team for being here for this discussion. Yeah, we bring it to a close. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.